China is undergoing one of the most rapid economic transformations in the world. As you are probably aware, China's economy has expanded rapidly over the last 3 decades. Industrialization began in the 1950s with Mao's introduction of a 5-year plan reminiscent of Soviet industrialization. China has achieved economic growth comparable to that of the Western world in a matter of years, compared to decades previously. The country has grown to become the largest manufacturer and economic powerhouse in the world. However, things have shifted significantly in recent years, and not in a positive direction. Today's video will discuss the issues that have weighed down China's economy to the point where economists are beginning to doubt the country's contribution to global growth. All of these issues have a direct effect on the growth of the country's GDP. The Chinese economy expanded by 4.9% year-on-year in the third quarter of 2021, a significant decline from the previous quarter's 7.9% and 18.3% growth and slightly below the market forecast of 5.2%. Like any modern industrialized country, China's growth is heavily on infrastructure development. However, recent events have impacted to keep consistent growth. Among many other events, the energy crisis and the real estate crisis are the root cause, on which this YouNik video will focus. Consider first the energy crisis. China's manufacturing sector, which is highly export dependent, has been severely harmed by the energy crisis. China's energy crisis forced the government to extend power restrictions in at least 20 provinces and regions that were already struggling to cope. This has had a negative impact on more than 66% of the country's gross domestic product. Numerous businesses were forced to close their doors as the country's millions of residents faced a power outage. Despite several months of struggle, China has yet to emerge from it. Now, the Chinese economy is being shaken by another storm recently as a result of this power outage. The collapse of the housing market and Evergrande, among many other companies, is at the forefront of this crisis. Evergrande's demise precipitated the Chinese economy's slowing growth, as the real estate sector fueled the economy's growth for far too long. There are a lot of ghost cities in China, where there are numerous abandoned structures and no residents. China has the highest proportion of vacant apartments in the world according to Statista. China is more reliant on real estate development than any other country. This reliance can trigger massive crashes like in 2008 in Europe when the bubble burst. Additionally, numerous experts draw parallels between China's real estate investment model and the US housing crisis of 2008 to 2009. Both countries had staked their economic futures on the exponential growth of housing demand and prices, and thus incorporated provisions for cheap credit. Banks in the United States of America created financial products using subprime loans. In China, both state-owned financial institutions and offshore private investors ensured developers had affordable credit, which boosts the country's growth story. However, now that China's bubble getting burst, other countries fear that the fall will spread to the rest of the world, as occurred during the 2008-09 crisis. Another reason, which is rarely mentioned, is massive infrastructure spending. While we constantly tout the economic benefits of infrastructure investment, unplanned and unneeded spending can be perilous. Consider China's massive investment in high-speed rail infrastructure development. As the Chinese economy boomed in the early 2000s, a large number of young job seekers began migrating to large cities in search of work. Workers required transportation between cities in order to reach their homes, but air travel and personal automobiles are prohibitively expensive. As a result, China's government began planning high-speed rail projects. Additionally, the government used these projects as an economic stimulus to avert the 2008-09 financial crisis. These types of infrastructure projects are extremely effective at reversing economic slowing, as they create thousands of jobs, benefit local industries, and provide a long-term sustainable source of revenue. It did, however, have a number of disadvantages. While railway lines connecting major cities are typically profitable, those connecting small towns are typically not. Despite this, for obvious political reasons, the government pushed for rail line expansion, rendering them unsustainable to operate. When comparing high-speed railways to conventional rail lines, you'll notice that conventional rail lines are less expensive to build and maintain, which means that tickets are also significantly less expensive, which is critical for a large proportion of the labor force that migrates to cities. Additionally, conventional railways could transport cargo, which would have been advantageous for a country heavily dependent on manufacturing. Thus, high-speed rail lines have been a headache for a country heavily dependent on manufacturing. While we are all aware of China's economic success as a result of its workforce, the country's demographic advantage is eroding as the population ages. Soon, we'll publish an in-depth video on this subject, so subscribe now. Finally, We can assert that it will be extremely interesting to observe how China addresses these issues in light of current geopolitical circumstances. Only time will be able to answer all your questions, but in the meantime, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this video, and if you're a new subscriber, please consider doing so.